Hello everyone and welcome to the Caseware Analytics AuditNet webinar event, How to Build a Data Analytics Strategy in a Digital World. My name is Jim Kaplan and I'll be moderating today's webinar. Serving the global audit community, AuditNet is the primary online resource for auditors to share resources, tools, and experiences. AuditNet has been at the forefront of websites dedicated to promoting the use of audit technology and has now expanded its offering to include high-quality, web-based training for auditors and finance professionals.
Caseware Analytics is the maker of IDEA data analysis software.
Caseware Analytics has partnered with AuditNet to share presentations featuring the best practices of respected professionals in the audit community. Look for our next release, IDEA 10.3, this fall. Among many enhancements, IDEA 10.3 allows auditors to leverage the advanced math and machine learning innovations that are available in Python. I'm pleased now to introduce today's guest speaker, Ian Curtin. Ian, a senior audit manager with more than 33 years experience in financial services and internal audit, has been with TSB Bank for 4 years. At TSB, he has established the audit function of the Challenger Bank through a dynamic role that includes audit planning, methodology, technology, quality assurance, data analytics, and training. At this point, I'd like to turn the floor over to Ian Curtin. Ian?
Thank you very much for that fabulous introduction, and thank you everybody for joining today. It's a real opportunity for me to share the TSB story. I've had a fantastic 4 years where we've seen the creation of a brand new bank, and that kind of project, that kind of creation of a bank is unprecedented. And I'm hoping today to share some of that story, some of the things that we've achieved, some of the things that we plan to develop in the future. And throughout this story, I'm going to tell a bit of a thread about how our technology has moved on and where we intend to be, and really how that really will help us as an audit team develop our data analytics capabilities, our strategy, and really live the vision for the future that we have as an audit function. We've had quite a few experiences over the last few years using the IDEA tool, and I will share a few of those as well. So,
and we did get a question come in. What is an audit strategy?
Well, that's a great question. If you let me pause for just a few seconds and start my presentation, I'll tell you exactly what one is, because that's where we're going to start. And it's no surprise to me really that a good proportion of people out there who listen today do have an audit strategy, and particularly those that are regulated, and particularly those who in the UK have seen the IAA code and the IAA standards, really where it kind of drives you to have a plan. So let's kind of start really by talking a little bit about TSB and how I developed a plan to create a new function and the strategy that sat behind that, and maybe that will answer that caller's question. Just going to move the slide on. Here we go. So that TSB. So I guess I mentioned at the outset that TSB was a brand new bank. Well, actually, it's a brand new bank with a 200-year history. And to start the story off, in the crash when all the financial services were struggling, Lloyds Bank, the former owner of the TSB brand, acquired a lot of banks, and as part of that, the European Commission ruled that they need to divest some of the things that they acquired, and Lloyds decided that they would separate out the brand of TSB and launch a brand new bank on the high street as part of a project, and that project is called Verdi. But if you have a look at TSB, it really started 200 years ago. Henry Duncan set up a bank to provide a place where they could support the local community. And TSB now has taken that mission statement that started 200 years ago to really develop a bank that serves its local community. But throughout the history of TSB, we've kept very close to the foundations of the local community. So when I said it was a new bank, we launched 4 years ago. There was a very large project as part of Lloyds that separated out up to 600 IT systems, 8,500 staff, a bank that started with assets of around 20 billion, 634 branches, although we actually started with 633 because one had a fire, so we had to close it before we opened. But really it was a mammoth project to create what was the largest banking launch in a very short space of time. And in 2013, that bank became independent and started serving its customers on the high street. So that's a little bit about our history. A little bit later on in the presentation, I'm going to share a few stats about where audit functions around the world are. But one of the first questions that I have to really start with is to understand this TSB bank. And I mentioned in my introduction a few moments ago something about the Verdi project and what that really involved. And one of the decisions that I had to make really is about what kind of team would we have, how would we use data analytics. But let's start with the bank. I've got a few stats on the screen there, how many customers, how many current accounts. So it's a large bank, but not as big as some. It's there with a very clear mission, a very clear set of objectives. From an audit perspective, I need to understand the bank. I need to understand what it's trying to achieve. I need to understand really what some of the risks are within that bank. And out of that understanding, I can start to think about the size, shape of the audit team, where we're going to invest our time, starting to have a look at this bank and to really understand where it is. So that 3-year project that really resulted in the creation of a new bank on the high street really started for me in late 2012 and the beginning of 2013, where I decided to take what was called a bit of a leap of faith. I was joining an organisation where we didn't really know how it would succeed. We didn't know who was going to own it. At that time, there was a sale going through. But what we did have was a real clear understanding from the chief exec in the organisation of what it was trying to achieve. It was trying to create a brand new competitor, one that would put the customer at its heart and really keep that local communities linked. It had a very clear mission statement to bring competition back to banking, and really to start to reconnect with our customers and local communities after a time really where banking became a difficult name in the high street. And I was sitting in January 2013 in an empty office with no people, no processes, but my remit was to create a brand new audit function within 3 months and have all the infrastructure ready to go. And many of the colleagues that then became partners within TSB joined really because we bought into the mission statement. It was a challenge that came along at a good time for me and for many of the people who chose to join the bank. And you can see that there was a lot of time invested setting this up. I mentioned some of the stats, 600 systems, and Lloyds became our IT service provider. And within the complexity of that build, we have copies of systems, segregations and shares. So those of you with an IT background, that quantity of systems, making sure that we were fully independent, making sure our data was segregated, making sure the bank was ready to launch, and making sure it was ready to service its customers, started to take a bit of story of it from an auditor's perspective of some of the things that we needed to start to think about. If I think about the question, what is an audit strategy? I've put on the screen here a a picture I drew in that January and presented to one of the first audit committee meetings about how we were going to go about building a brand new audit function. The vertical grey columns represent really what the bank had. There was a bank built, designed and ready to go. It had its own strategy, its own branding, it had its own products, it had systems that were tried and tested because they were being provided by the parent organisation. And therefore, really we knew that we had a banking model that would work. And yeah, that kind of leverage allowed me to start to think about, and the team that we were starting to create, or what are some of the things that we need. As an audit function, there's always expectations on you. There are internal expectations coming from your audit committee, from the board, from the exec, about what they want from an audit function. It's pretty important that when you set up a new function, you're positioned well in the organisation to be able to help that organisation deliver what it's trying to achieve. So we were collecting views and information from the business as it was getting ready to start about what audit needed to be and what they were worried about. From an external perspective, you've got drivers as well. You've got regulatory expectations. You've got professional expectations about what an audit team needs to do, how much we need to cover. And then you need to start to think about resources. I need to think about data analytics. Do we have the capability to do that ourselves within what was a team that started out around 14 people? Do we need additional help and expertise? And that's where things like co-source models, this is where you buy in expertise from the industry, from professional practice to pad out or fill out skills that you have but need more of, to provide expertise that you don't have, or just to provide resources where you have more audit work than you have the capability to deliver at that time. And certainly part of our strategic requirements was a very good flexible resource model. And then we started to overlay tools. So I was used to tools like IDEA for data analytics, and I brought those with me. We had a GRC audit tool that would run our workflow, and we put that in within 6 weeks of starting the team. And then we had a few end-user computing applications. So I was starting to build some tools to get us up and running. We started to collect information from the business. Key MI, where were the project work streams? Were they ready to go? What were some of the products that were in operation? What was the banking model? Where were the business units? We had 10 head office functions, 8,500 staff, 600 branches. What was the geography of that? What were some of the issues that the organisation was managing? And we started to do initial risk assessments. So within 3 months, we had established our infrastructure, onboarded the team, and we'd presented the strategy to set the function up, and we had an outline audit plan. And really that's what I mean by having an audit strategy. You need to have a vision for how you're going to conduct your audits. You need your tools, and then you need to start to refine that. So we had an audit charter that gave us our authority. We started to develop measures to see what our success would look like, and we started to organise ourselves into teams facing the business. That allowed us to deep dive and do some risk assessments and develop that outline audit plan, and start to prioritise the work that we're going to do and identify areas and skills that we needed, either people, technology skills, or maybe opportunities to think about doing data analytics. And we started to evaluate where we would start. And audit strategies are becoming more common. Now, if I think about today, We have an overall strategy for the department, where we want to be, but we have a number of strategies around how we're going to audit certain topics like conduct. And we also have a data analytics strategy, which I'm going to cover a little bit later today. But hopefully that answers the question about really what I mean by an audit strategy. This is, how are you going to operate, how are you going to measure success, and how are you going to then drive that forward through some kind of continuous improvement. Because auditing is really a bit of an art rather than a science. You need great people with great skills, and you need the right tools. And if you've got that, you've got to start. But really, you need a bit of a vision that's tied back to the organisation. Ultimately, audit succeeds if the organisation succeeds. And if we help the organisation achieve what it's setting out to do and help them manage those risks in that process, then really we're on the right track. And that's really where we started. So by July 2013, we had a full team. We were ready to go. We'd identified the first audits and we were planning them. And when the bank really came into its own, became independent on the 9th of September 2013, we were able to hit the ground running. We were able to start those first audits and really start to make a bit of a difference to the organisation. And at the end of the day, that's what we're here to do. I'm just going to move on a little bit and start to think about the building blocks that came as part of that. So an audit universe. When I started auditing, which probably too many years ago, audit universes were going out of fashion a little bit, certainly in Europe. If you're in the Far East or the States, they've been a dominant feature for a long period and remain so. In Europe, we were trying to really come to a place where we can exercise judgment. And we used audit universes, that mathematical method of trying to score your gross risk, work out what things you could audit, and we call those entities, and work out how many of those make up your universe. So I always describe an audit universe about like getting your telescope out and staring into the night sky. There are certain things in that universe that are important, planets, solar systems, and there are certain things when you look through your telescope that you see that look very pretty, nice, pretty planets. You might see one or two hot spots, maybe one or two things going supernova that may be a bit of cause for concern. So the art of developing an audit universe is really to paint a picture of the world around you or the universe around you and identify the business activities that are the highest risk, and also really understand what you might need to audit. And that's really where you start. There's lots of technology that support that, lots of methodologies out there in the world, and I'm sure all of you have got your own methods. But essentially, you're trying to quantify what you might want to audit. The methodology that you have, it really is about how you conduct your planning, your risk assessment, how you deliver each audit, and the tools that you use. So I brought with me a principle-based methodology. I train the team in how to apply that methodology, and part of that really was how we develop the audit plan, how we deliver individual audits in that plan, and really what are we trying to achieve through each audit? What are some of the standards that we want to apply? How do we check the quality of our teams? Then you need the people to go with that. And your risk assessment and your understanding of the organisation really lets you understand the type of skills that you might need. Some of that comes from your own people. Some of that comes from the structure of the organisation. Whether you have business lines of defence, whether you have specialist functions, where you can draw on expertise. But ultimately, audit needs its own people. It needs to be independent, and they need to have the right skills. And an expectation from our exec that we need to put people in front of the business who are capable, insightful, but understand and are technically very good, understand the business, understand the topic, and are able to advise at the top level. So when we were recruiting, we were looking for those skills. Some of the skills I was looking for, the skills to help me audit, and some of those were data analytics skills, some of those were IT skills. So we were able to start and build on the recruitment to get the right skills to match the plan. And last but not least, you need your systems and tools. And I mentioned we have a GRC audit tool that effectively manages our audit universe, that helps us capture our audit results and helps us report those to the audit committee and the board. We also had other tools, and one of those first tools that I made sure I got was a data analytics tool, because I knew the nature of the environment we're in now is that the days of just taking a judgmental sample for particularly regulatory areas are becoming a bit in the past. You need to provide enough assurance, and the availability of data in organizations is much more readily available. So part of any audit strategy is to have an analytical, a data analytics skill set and a mindset to say, actually, we're going to use data to help us audit. That's often a bit of a challenge for some, because where do you start? And we'll cover that as we go through today. So why use IDEA? I'd used it before, was one reason, and therefore I was familiar with it. Some of the things that I found when using the product that you might not get from other tools, you know, some people say to me, why do you need a separate tool? You can use Excel, it does a lot of stuff, and I would agree it does. But you do come across situations where you need a professional tool that lets you import very large data sizes, and you'll see an example later where we imported 80 gigabytes, and the software handles large sizes of data very well, and you can import any size. Another thing that if you're doing data analytics is you don't want to corrupt your data sources, particularly if you're going to rely on that for regulatory or investigative work. You need to be able to prove that you haven't altered the source of the data. And products like IDEA, and I do this very well, they protect the data source, and any calculations that you make, any revisions, there is a clear audit trail as you go through. And you're always able to get back to that original data source, which is protected. You really need to maximize your capabilities. In a small team, once you develop a tool or a test, you want to be able to repeat it. And again, tools like IDEA let you capture those tests that you develop, store those and repeat them. And when we start to think about things like continuous auditing and real-time monitoring, which are some of the things that, you know, audit teams that are applying a data analytics strategy will have in place, that capability is quite important. We inherited 600 systems, and some of those systems are legacy systems written 20, 30 years ago. Some of them are quite modern, and therefore the file types, the variety of files, the formats you get your data in, very much that varies, and you need something that's robust and capable. And that's why we took a look at IDEA originally, and we continue to use IDEA for that reason. We do perform a lot of analysis, and what you want is a toolkit that lets you take the source data and answer audit questions, the what ifs. And generally on an audit, when you're using data analytics, I like to use auditors who know the business to come up with the questions. But you need skilled people as well to perform the analysis, and you need a tool that supports it. We apply different sampling techniques, and we look for a tool that will help us do that. So once you've got your sample, if you've got some methodology alongside a tool that supports it, you're in a great place. And IDEA gave that to us. And what we find is often, because of the inheritance of systems we have at the moment, we're often trying to bring different data sets together. We're making joins in tables, and that's quite a common activity to provide more insight by matching different bits of data together. So the tool supported that. And then at the end of the process, we get that complete history and the analysis to go with it. So whatever tool you use, those are some of the attributes that I would be looking for in any tool. And we get all of those from our current IDEA tool. We started our audit plan and we started to develop that, and we started to get a few experiences, and we made small steps. And you know, the honest thing is we're not where we want to be at the moment, but we've had some great experiences over the last 3 years as we started to embed data analytics into more of our audits. But we've got more to do in that space. If I start to have a look at what IDEA or what kind of tools we use, there's a few examples on the screen. And if I take you through some of those examples in a moment, you'll see some of the answers and some of the benefits that we've got. But okay, so there's a question about what is GRC. It stands for Governance, Risk and Compliance. There's a lot of products out there that use that name. But essentially, most audit functions have a tool that captures the risks in the organisation, either from a first and second line, the business risks, or just from an audit perspective. They are typically workflow tools that allow you to create work papers, but also track audit issues. And we have a GRC tool. We also have EUCs, end user computing. Sometimes your audit tool doesn't do everything that you want, and therefore we extract data out of our audit tool and use tools like Excel to visualize or present some of that data using different tools. We call those EUCs. So there's a couple of questions there about some of the terminology. How large is my team? Well, I've got, at the moment, we've got about 44 people, and those are a range of directors, heads of, senior audit managers. They're drawn from a background of regulators, risk practitioners, professional auditors, and that variety in the team gives me the skill set that we're looking for. There's a question here about a prescribed frequency for setting the audit strategy. No, really, it's down to you as an audit function. I think most audit teams have a conversation with the audit team. I think if you're in the UK, the IIA code really drives you. The IIA code came out of the UK regulatory review with the Institute of Internal Auditors to articulate really what does good look like in the UK from an audit function. I think if you're certainly in the UK, it kind of drives you to regularly update your strategies, to report annually to your audit committee on how those are going, and that's really what we do. What I'm starting to try and ask through these questions is that I find a lot of teams are like ourselves. They've dabbled with data analytics. They have it embedded within audits, and really that's where we are at the moment. More mature functions, some of the bigger organisations, they have taken this on and are starting to develop and invest in their data analytics to provide more real-time assurance. And as we get towards the end of the presentation, I'll share a few stats about where some organisations are and really where we are and where we want to be. But it doesn't surprise me that the percentage is a lot lower for continuous monitoring. Continuous monitoring really involves a bit of investment in understanding the organisation, its key controls, and getting to the data that will allow you to monitor those activities on a regular basis. And not all organisations have the access to the data or the time to develop that, but certainly something that we are looking to do. I'm just going to move on. We'll talk about a few examples where we get some benefits, and we'll come on to talk about that a little bit more. So I've got 3 case studies here. It's always useful to think about reality. So when I think about data analytics, sometimes people get stuck in the technology. It's going to be difficult to get the data. It's going to be difficult to think about the calculations. Really, I see data analytics is really just a helping hand to an audit team. It lets you test an awful lot more, 100% ideally. But what you really need behind data analytics is the will, the vision, and the right questions to ask. And then with a little bit of technical knowledge, you can do an awful lot. So this particular one, where we were looking at credit risk acquisitions, decision and strategies. So what we were able to get, and I've got some test or example data on the screen, is a set of data for 3 months that allowed us to analyse the credit decisions being made when people apply for loans and mortgages. And we started to build some questions behind that around what we would expect to see. There are age cut-off limits for some of our products. There are minimum income, affordability criteria. So the business themselves have created a set of structures, a set of controls, a set of expectations. And what we were able to do is to take that data set and look to see if there was data that fell outside of those expectations. You wouldn't expect somebody with age 1 to be applying for credit. Some of them are fairly easy sorts. You can just get some base data, sort it by the age of the people, or you can start to use IDEA to kind of filter out data that meets a certain criteria. So we were able to check really that the controls that the business had put in place were working as expected. And we were able to do that across a whole population. Traditional methods of taking a random sample or a manual sample and logging onto systems, looking at records, would not give you the coverage and assurance that taking a whole data set would do. And once you do find some exceptions, you can apply traditional audit methods to follow those up. Was that an error in the data? Is there something that we didn't quite understand? Or really, is this an example of a real problem? The second example relates to charges, and that's particularly close to the hearts of customers and regulators. You want to make sure that you're charging the customers the right amount, you're not overcharging them. You want to make sure you're collecting your charges. So this is probably the largest data analytics example we did, 80 gigabytes of data, 1.6 million transactions imported into the system. And after a bit of cleansing of that data, we were able to put in the charges, find out which of the actual data fell outside the expected charging for particular products. And that was relatively straightforward to do. And on the first pass, we found 99% accuracy. So the charges we saw in the data matched the tariffs that the business were communicating to our customers. The 1%, though, is really where the interest is. And we were able to follow up those exceptions, stratify the data, split it into different types of exceptions, investigate some examples underneath, and get to really, were those genuine mistakes? Were they overcharging or undercharging? And thankfully on this audit, we were able to explain that 1%. Some of them related to refunds or different charging methods that broke the charge up so it didn't match. So when you do get a data set, often it's the bits at the edges that really make the difference. And the value you got from being able to say, we've looked at 1.6 million transactions, that message you can give to the business is much more powerful than not using analytics at all. If I think about the final example here, and this is an example of where we're going to start to move into continuous auditing, and I've just revealed all the slides. So we looked at a sample of partners. These are the people who are working in our branches. And we got a number of data sets and joined them together. We looked at sales, we looked at performance, we looked at grievances, we looked at dismissals, and what we looked for patterns in the data to try and find really whether people were living up to the values of TSB, to make sure that we were understanding whether there was any correlation between some of the data that we're seeing that might lead you to identify practices that we didn't really want to see in the organization. And you can only do that in a tool like IDEA. And what we found here is really gave us a real insight that the business hadn't seen for themselves. It showed some insight on how different regions perform differently. It showed different turnover or maybe some different practices being operated across different regions. And you can get that just by analysing the data. And we presented it, and this particular slide shows a visualisation of the different regions, and I've taken some of the detail out for obvious reasons. But it really turned into a very visual way of presenting your audit results and led to some insights that perhaps the business hadn't been able to see for themselves because they've never really stood back from the data or the branches in this way. So those are three examples of what I would call traditional use of analytics. This last one is very repeatable. And that's really where you're kind of coming into continuous control monitoring and continuous auditing. Different phrases go around the industry. So I'll just kind of bring you up to date, really. Our journey continues. I started life on XP, would you believe, this year in my organisation. I was upgraded a few months ago to a new platform based on Windows 7. But the organisation is poised and at the starting blocks for a revolution. We're going to be moving on to a new platform. And that really does open up the doors for me to really enhance our data analytics. We'll have our own data warehouse. We'll be able to get total data lineage, understand where the data comes from in the organisation. And the new tools allows us to gather business intelligence as an audit team and access all of that. So my world is about to get a whole lot better. TSB is also becoming a digital bank. In fact, the chief exec really likes to describe us as an organisation, a digital organisation that just happens to be a bank. And if you follow the press, we've been the first bank to use Samsung's iris recognition technology. We set a very clear vision for our new workplace in terms of the tools that allow us to move into that new digital world. We're going to be one of the first banks to operate a cloud-based technology. We've built in the last few months a state-of-the-art banking platform that's ready to go. And all of that will take TSB away from its current technology into a brand new world. So there's a good question here. What's the most frequent data types that are being imported into IDEA? I like plain text, but we use Excel as a store sometimes. Really, IDEA is very good at interpreting data, but the true answer is I take the data in whatever format the business can give it to me, whatever's easiest and quickest. And often the challenge is how to move it from where it is to the audit team. But plain text is quite a common format. Data export into Excel is another method that we use quite a bit. And really source data directly from the system using whatever system tools that are available to report or extract that data for some of the more complex systems. And we try and get it into a format that is easy to import. Some formats are easier than others. Excel labels the columns quite neatly. So hopefully that answers that question. So there's a good question here about an IT professional with the programming knowledge. Get the best, is the best kind of professional for use data analytics? I think it depends. There's different types of analytics. I think you need people who know the business and know auditing and know what questions, aligned with a skill set to extract the data. And you can do that in lots of different ways. You can employ data scientists, you can employ data technicians, you can apply professional IT people to help you get the data and tidy it up. But that skill set alone does not necessarily come up with the right questions to ask in any audit. So I think the reality is, yes, you can use professional IT auditors to do this, and they'll do a great job, but they'll need some help from the frontline auditors who know the business to ask the right questions. I'm just going to share a few slides, and I'll come back to that as my last point, really. So we all know and recognize a digital company, and there's a few examples on the screen here. We don't always associate banks in that space. What we're trying to do is create a new workplace, and you'll see on the screen products that you might, Office 365. We are going to be fully mobile, so device independent. We're going to use a cloud-based logon, so it doesn't really matter where you log on from. Our data is all stored in our own data center. We'll have new tools, SharePoint and intranet sites that allow us to collaborate much more visually. And you can see on the screen here, really, that sharing information is key to any organization. It's become crucial for an audit function. Collaborating using some of the new tools to edit documents in real time. So why do I share this, really, some of the tools that we're doing? With my audit hat on, it brings risks and opportunities. Risks in the sense of moving from data stored and carried around on laptops into new technology. And that isn't always tried and tested, but in my mind the risk is changing. At the moment we have a risk of loss of data. If somebody loses a laptop, physically that data is lost if it breaks or is stolen. If you put your data in a data center and access it remotely, you can put protections around it. So when you move to new technology platforms, the risks change. They don't necessarily, one is not necessarily better or worse, they are different. What does happen though is opportunities, and this is really around about data strategy. So I mentioned a few stats. There are many organizations in different places, and if you follow the corporate executive board, if you're a member of them, they are one of many organizations that have provided analysis of the industry. And the industry is moving to more use of data analytics. Some are at a different level of maturity than others. Some have professional IT teams or data analytics teams. Some use auditors for that. Some teams have started to develop data sources that support their planning, that real-time monitoring, dashboards of data around their business areas that allow them to spot hotspots and target their audits around those. Some teams have moved into places where they are regularly testing key controls and using analytics to help do that, providing more regular assurance. The world is changing, and the maturity level that some organizations are at. More enabled organizations are to the right of the diagram showing you here. They use data analytics. It's fully embedded within the functions that the audit function and the organisation. And really, we're looking in most cases to use all of those analytics tools. At the other end of the spectrum, you've got people who are really at the start of that journey. So I want to encourage you to have a bit of ambition, to see past the technology really, because the journey is worth it. I mentioned we're not there. We have a data analytics strategy and plan because you can't move there in one leap. You need to develop your capabilities. And an enabler for me and for TSB is our new technology. Having access to our own data warehouse, our own modern technology that simplifies the systems that we use. Having a new digital data platform for our customers where all the customer accounts in one system are enablers for you to do some of the monitoring, the investigations, the continuous auditing. And really, wherever you are and whatever technology you use, you might have to apply different strategies to match where you are. But we have a vision, we have an aim, and really we want to deliver that on the back of these new platforms. So cloud banks are going to be the future. Digital technology, Office 365 and the power that opens up. Many organisations are already there or adopting it. It's not something to be frightened of. Actually, it's a real opportunity. So I want to encourage you to maybe think forward a little bit. Ask yourself where you are and where you'd like to be. And I think if you start asking those questions, you can start to develop a plan for yourselves. So I've kind of reached the end of the little story I'm trying to tell. It's been a fantastic journey for me over the last 3 years, and I'm really looking forward to some of the benefits and some of the opportunities that tomorrow will bring. I mentioned to a few colleagues often that we got a nice rocket on the launch pad, but we haven't hit the fuse yet. It's just around the corner for us. So thank you for listening to this. I'm going to kind of pause now and give a good opportunity for questions.
Great presentation, Ian. We do have a number of questions that have come in. I'll try to pick out some of the ones that maybe you can answer quickly. We only have about 6 minutes left for today. We want to let everybody get back. What percentage of your 44 auditors know and use IDEA on a regular basis?
So we have 10 licenses. So 10 users have the opportunity to use it. I have at the moment 2 or 3 people who are quite skilled in it, and they use it more often than not. In our audit function, we've found some audits where we've used our COSLs, and therefore we've used those for audits as well. So we are developing a data team, and that's part of the strategy, and we intend to embed a trained IDEA user in each team as part of that. So those people who are using it less frequently, as we move forward and then data becomes available, we'll have more people.
Okay. Do you think it is important to train auditors in data science, data analytics?
Not all auditors, no. I think people need an awareness. People need an awareness of what is possible. They need to understand what data can do to make their lives easier, to be able to audit better. I do think there's a role for specialists, and the survey and the data I said is that there's only a small percentage of audit teams across the world are starting to employ data scientists in their team, and they are able to provide much more insights into data, to provide much more analysis than I think you could ever train an auditor to do. But I do think every auditor should be IT aware. I do think every auditor should engage with data analytics, but it's sometimes better to have a helping hand when the technology is not necessarily their day job. Somebody who specialises and focuses and have great skills really helps an audit function.
Okay. Here's one on data analytics and detecting fraud. Do you use data analytics or IDEA to identify potential fraud, either internal or external fraud?
Great question. So in our bank, the responsibility for investigating fraud is not an audit activity. It's a a business activity. However, every audit function across the world has an obligation under the IA standards to develop tests that make it more likely to detect fraud. And that's where analytics is quite helpful, because if you are doing traditional small sample sizes, you're going to have to get lucky to spot anomalies in your smaller samples. You increase your chances when you're looking at big data sets. You can develop tests that help you identify that. So I would answer that by saying is that we set out in every audit to try and identify anomalies, and some of those may be fraud. And therefore some audits lend themselves to more of that activity than others, but really I think it's a feature in thinking in almost every audit that we do.
Okay, and one final question here. We've got, which department is more apt to perform data analytics? In this person's organization, a commercial banking outfit, internal control has a team already doing analytics using ACL, while the audit department is about to be doing analytics as well.
I think it depends on your structures. It's it really is down what works for you. If there's a skill set that you can draw on, then that's great. But I think developing your own capability is also helpful. Even if you're drawing on resources of others, it helps you ask the right questions. It helps you push the boundaries a little bit if you've got some understanding of the art of what is possible. So I think really it's really down to the teams to find out what works for them and to define what kind of analytics that they want to do, and then the organization will flow from that.
Excellent, excellent. Well, Ian, I want to thank you for joining us today and presenting this information. We're glad you could join us and hope that the information was useful to all who attended. The purpose of our training is to provide high-quality training solutions as a benefit to our subscribers and site license users, covering timely topics with value-added resources and tools that you can use in your job. I want to thank everyone for joining us today, and Ian, if you have any final comments, you can make them now. Otherwise, wish you all a good day.
Yeah, and I'd like to wish everybody a great day as well. Thank you for listening, and we will capture some of the questions that we didn't quite get to today, and we'll try and answer some of those offline as well.
Excellent. Well, thank you all, and have a great day, and we look forward to you coming back again in the future. Bye.
Thank you.